So this is joint work with those guys there. And Marco and Stefano are postdocs at Sapienza University of Rome. Elisa is a PhD student, and Prabhakar is at Google. Okay, so we are at KDD in this room. This is a session on recommender systems. So I don't need to convince you that recommender systems are good. It would be like preaching to the choir. So we can skip to the next slide. And what we're interested in this talk has to do with the economic dimension of recommender systems. So we're not trying to build beautiful recommender systems. We just want to understand what is their economic effect. Okay, so we all know that recommender systems are used everywhere. So YouTube uses it, Amazon, Booking.com, and if you want food, or you go on vacation, or if you want a book, you want this, you want that. So essentially, more and more, every online choice is filtered and influenced and mediated by recommender systems. Okay? So they are the main gateway between us and online choices. So as such, so this makes them powerful economic actors. And the question is, what is their power to influence the market? Can they shape it in a particular way? Can they determine the success or the failure of a product? To what extent? So that's the type of question we are interested in. Okay? So that's our question. To what extent can a recommendation system alter a market? So I want to make this question now more precise, and I want to exemplify this question a little bit. So now there are all these wonderful questions about the power of data mining and this and that. So imagine that ignited and enthusiastic about these powerful methods, you decide to start a new company, which is called KDD Foods, turning bits into bytes. Okay? So what the company does is to propose online foods, high-quality food at affordable price. Okay? So that's what the company does. And of course, you're going to leverage your beautiful skills in data mining. Okay, so now you start your business, and suppose that the following happens. So that's your distribution of sales. The distribution of sales says, for instance, that, say, the hot dog is a top hit, and it commands 35% of your sales. And orange juice gives you 15% of your sales, and so on and so forth. Okay? So now you are, again, enthusiastic about the commercial success of your enterprise. And so you decide to improve your online website and to empower it with a beautiful recommender system, maybe based on deep learning. Okay? Now, the question is, what happens now? Can this happen? For instance, is it possible that the hot dog, which was 35% of your sales, now becomes niche? And vice versa, is it possible that Martini, that before was a niche product, now is a big hit? So is it possible that when you insert a recommender system into a market, then this changes completely the shape of this market? That's our question. And we want quantitative answers. Okay? All right. So now, if you tackle this kind of question, there are different approaches that you can try. So you can try user studies, social psychology experiments, data mining with real data if you have the data, or you can try mathematical modeling. All of these are good, and all of these are going to give you some kind of insight. So in this talk, we try mathematical modeling. So we propose in this paper a mathematical model for a system where a recommendation system operates to answer the question that I outlined before. Okay? So let me describe to you the mathematical model. So in this mathematical model, we want to incorporate two main ingredients. So the first is that success breeds success. So the system, as you will see, has the following property, that the more successful an item, the higher the probability that it will be recommended. Okay? So the second is that we want to capture social forces. So essentially, recommendations will be made by friends. So these are the two main ingredients that we will try to model with our mechanism. Okay, so let's be a little bit more precise. So in the model, we have products and users. Users are also called buyers. And products can be bought multiple times. So think of them as food items. Now, second, the users are connected via network. So the network can be anything, any network you want, and this gives flexibility to the model. But it helps with the intuition to think of this network as a social network among people. And now you can see that these are directed edges, and these are trust relationships. So these are trust relationships. So for instance, in this particular case, you can see that Shrek trusts Yoda a lot and Elastic Girl, but doesn't trust Wild Coyote very much. Now, those numbers, they sum up to 1. So that's the probability distribution. Okay? Then another ingredient is that users, they have their own personal preferences. So they come with a probability distribution over the products. So for instance, here you have this user, Wild Coyote, that is really, he really likes the tornado kit a lot. But he doesn't like this integrating pistol so much. Okay, and then Shrek has his own probability distribution over the products and so forth. Okay? So another ingredient, okay, so now let's look at the purchasing process. So items are bought one after the other. And suppose that we are observing the current purchase. So now the current buyer is chosen at random. Suppose that the current buyer is Shrek. So Shrek is chosen with a probability f sub Shrek. So f stands for frequency. So now we want to model the following type of situation. So we all know, for instance, that Shrek is a very conservative buyer. He's very reluctant to buy. He only buys very rarely. On the other hand, Wild Coyote, he loves gadgets, and so his house is inundated by gadgets. Okay, so you can model this situation by using these numbers, the frequency. Okay, now, if Shrek is the current buyer, he can do one of two things. He can either follow the recommendation, and this happens with a probability alpha of Shrek. So every user has its own alpha, okay? Or Shrek can not follow the recommendation, and in which case, with probability 1 minus alpha, it will use its own personal distribution of preferences over the products. So now let me explain what happens when Shrek follows the recommendation. Okay, so first, Shrek will pick a friend. We'll pick a random friend with a probability which is given by the numbers that you have on those edges. So for instance, in this particular case, Shrek will follow the recommendation of Wild Coyote with the probability 0.01. So let's assume that indeed Shrek follows the recommendation of Wild Coyote, and what happens now? So let's look at the multi-set of products that Wild Coyote has bought so far. So in this particular case, there are 5 products. And now, let's assume for simplicity that the following takes place. So the item that will be recommended to Shrek will be picked uniformly at random in this multi-set. So for instance, the tornado kit will be chosen with probability 1/5. And the dynamite pack will be chosen with probability 2/5, and so on. Okay? All right. Fine. This is one particular way in which you can implement this. There are, actually, what we do is much more general. Let me try to explain the mechanism in full generality. So let's assume that we are at time t. And so now, in this particular instant, the tornado kit will be recommended with probability 1/5. So now let's let things unfold for a while, and let's come back after 3 months. And let's suppose that again, in 3 months' time, Shrek is again the buyer, and again he follows Wild Coyote's recommendation. So now, but in 3 months from now, Wild Coyote will have accumulated a huge set of products. So now the question is, what is the probability with which this particular instance of the tornado kit will be recommended? Now there are 10 items here, so probability will be 1/10. And if there were 100 items, it would be 1/100, okay? So that's one particular way in which this can take place. Now, what I want to stress is this, that the force, the strength with which that particular instance of the tornado gate is recommended goes to 0 as time goes by. Okay? And that's exactly what we want to capture. So we call this the past fades away condition. So you can essentially use any mechanism you want to recommend products as long as the following condition is satisfied. So eventually, you want to put 0 probability on the items that are purchased now. So if something is purchased now, maybe it's very relevant now and tomorrow and the day after tomorrow. But in 100 years from now, it will fade away. Okay? So that's a technical condition. Now notice that there are many different ways in which this can be realized. So one would be what I told you just now. So take an item uniformly at random. So as people keep accumulating items, then the strength will go to 0. Or you can say, well, no, this is not this is not the correct way to model recommendation systems. What you really want to do is that you should be aware that only the recent history matters. So only the last 10 items should be recommended. Great. So this also is compliant with the condition. Or maybe you can say, well, no, there is an exponential decay. If something is bought now, it has weight 1. If it was bought yesterday, it has weight 1/2. And if it was bought 2 days ago, it has weight 1/4. Great. Again, this is compliant with the condition that the past fades away. So, all right, so these are all the ingredients. So again, there are users, buyers, items are bought one after the other. The current buyer is selected at random, and then it can either follow the recommendation or not. It follows its own inclinations, and when it follows the recommendation, there is an item. So a friend is picked, and then an item is recommended from the multiset of items bought so far. So now we start the system. What happens now? Okay, so let's consider this at the outset for a minute. So it is conceivable that the following could happen. So fix a product, say strawberries. Okay? So now strawberries, by chance alone, it could happen that strawberry gets a small advantage over chocolate. Now there is this mechanism that success breeds success. So this could be amplified, and you could get a cascade. So maybe strawberry conquers the entire market. So now start the system again. And then again, by chance alone, chocolate gets a small advantage. Now, because of this cascading effect, you could imagine that chocolate now takes all. It's winner taking all. Or maybe the system doesn't go anywhere. So chocolate and strawberry, they keep fluctuating forever. Okay, our main result says that none of this can happen. So the system, as I described it to you, which captures a large variety of situations, satisfies the following. So the system will always converge to a unique limit. It will always converge, and it will converge to a unique limit. So furthermore, the shape of the market at the limit, we know exactly what it is. Okay? And we can give it in closed form. So let me elaborate this a little bit. So I need a little bit of notation. So fix a user u. We are at time t, say now, and consider a product p, say strawberry. So x sub u of p at time t is the fraction of times that user u has bought p so far. Okay? Okay, now from now on, we drop, so we consider just one product p, so we drop p from everything. So consider the following vector. So x1 sub t is the fraction of times that user 1 has bought strawberry up to now. X sub 2 of t is the fraction of times that user 2 has bought strawberry up to now, and so on and so forth. So theorem says this: if the past fades away, then in expectation, the limit of that vector goes to a unique limit. And what is this unique limit? The unique limit is this. Now, L is a matrix, and B is the vector given by the personal preferences of the user. So B1 is how much user 1 likes strawberry when left to his or her own devices. B sub 2 is how much user 2 likes strawberries according to his or her own personal preferences, and so on and so forth. What is L? L is this matrix here. Now, I is the identity matrix. A is a diagonal matrix where you have the alphas on the diagonal. So alpha sub 1 is how much user 1, the probability with which user 1 follows the recommendation, and so on and so forth. What is M? M is the graph, the weights of the graph. So that's L. And that's what happens at the limit. Okay? Now, if you look into this a little bit more closely, you can gain a lot of information about what happens at the limit. Wow. Okay, so this is x infinity. So fix a user j, and let's assume that this thing is 0.2. Now notice that this 0.2 is a linear combination. So now this says that this 0.2 is the sum of this, and this is due to user 1. And then it's L2J blah blah times B2, and this is the contribution of user 2, and so on. So in this way, we can say for each and every user, you can actually pinpoint the influence that each user has on every other user. So at the limit, 20% of my basket of goods is strawberries. And so I know that 50% of that is due to him, 20% of that is due to her, and so on and so forth. We can compute. Okay? So now we can do more. So if you look at this vector, this tells you how much each user is going to influence the market overall. And in particular, if you look at this quantity, delta, this is exactly what we were looking for. So this is, so F times B, F is the vector of frequencies, the probability with which users buy items. So F times B, this is what happens to strawberries without the recommendation system. And gamma times B is what happens to strawberries at the limit with the recommendation system. So if this ratio is 1, then the recommender is not distorting strawberries. If it is 2, it is amplifying strawberries. If it is 0.1, it is dampening strawberries. Okay? So we can give precise answers to the question, how much is the market distorted? Okay, so then I can skip this since we are running out of time. And we ran some experiments. So the experiments, we used some public data set well known to everybody here. And we did simulations with a value of alpha equal to 2 with distribution, personal preferences of various types, power law or uniform or this and that. So the theorem gives you the boundaries within which things can happen. Now, if you want to, thanks to the closed form, you can do computational experiments, and for a given social network, for a given set of personal distributions, you can actually look at what happens in detail. Okay? So, for instance, what about convergence? So it does converge pretty well. Now, then we ask a question, okay, so if you take a real social network and you simulate the system, what about market distortion? So what we observe is that if you use real social networks, then essentially the distortion is very, very small. So in a way, if you want me to spin this a little bit, maybe too much, is that social networks are a bulwark against distorting effects. They protect you against distorting effects. On the other hand, you can concoct special networks, and you can sort of plant situations and oligarchies that force larger distortions. Okay? But the real network as such, so the social network as such, tends to protect you against heavy distorting effects. Okay, so this is what I just said. Now, thanks to the closed form, we can also give precise quantitative estimates of the influence of people to influence the market. So, for instance, in various social networks, you have users that are much more influential than others. So, for instance, if you look at Twitter, then maybe President Obama is 1 billion times more influential than me. Okay? 1 minute, yes. But overall, even though there are these powerful influencers, they cannot affect the market as a whole very much. Okay? Okay, now in summary, what we have is a fairly general model of recommender systems, and our goal was to study market influence. Now, the nice thing about this is that you have a closed form of the equilibrium of the limit, and then this was complemented with experiments that allowed us to explore a landscape of possibilities. Now, what I would like to stress is the following. So I don't want to overemphasize, oversell our result. We are very far from having, say, an accurate, realistic model of what real recommendation systems operate in a market. But we consider this as a proof of concept. So suppose that in a few months from now, you come up and you say, hey, I have a model which is more accurate than yours, it's more faithful than yours. It's like, great. Now, what you should try to do, if you can, is to come up with the following exercise. So can you prove that there is a limit? Is there always a limit? And if there is a limit, is there a closed form? Because if there is a closed form, then by analyzing this closed form, you can know now things about the future that are very accurate and are numerically very accurate. So I think, in a way, this is a proof of concept. This is how, ideally, things should turn out to be. Of course, I don't know whether this will be the case. Maybe other systems don't have a limit, but it would be interesting to prove, for instance. OK? So great. I thank you for your attention.
So we have time for a couple questions. Just walk to the microphone. And while people are thinking about the question, actually have a follow-up on your future research. One of the things that I was thinking when I was reading your paper is you make a couple of simplifying assumptions when you're coming up with a model, like, for example, the fact that the alpha is constant for a user, or the fact that you're not modeling the exposure to the recommendations over time. But I think that's what you said, is like, this is a proof of concept. I wonder, like, how many of those things do you think actually matter in the actual reality, and how do you think about modeling some of those secondary effects in the model?
So you're asking me whether you could have a dynamic thing so that these values change over time?
Yeah, change over time, or for example, the alpha of the user could change according to the different kind of item. I might be more likely to.
So as long as it's static, I don't think this will influence things much. But if you want things to change over time, then I don't know. Maybe it requires deeper mathematics. I don't know.
So I guess the one thing that would challenge your decay over time is this idea of, like, maybe the more I'm exposed to seeing an item, I end up being more likely to follow a recommendation, right? So
also some kind of reinforcement. Yeah, you can try lots of things. So yeah.
Okay. Sorry, there's some questions, so let's go to that microphone.
Hi. Fashion seems not to be a steady state, though. And you seem to be building a model for fashion. I mean, people's clothing preferences change with time. People's attitude towards, suntans and chubbiness and all kinds of things change with time. Is that something that you think is a limit of your? It should be describable in your model.
You can describe it. Then it's not clear. So again, I don't know mathematically how difficult it would be to prove anything, or so maybe if there is any good mathematician in the audience, they can give me. So if you allow things to change with time, it seems to be much more challenging. Maybe you can do it. Maybe you need differential equations.
No, in the sense that fashion seems to be a sort of chaos in the system, an instability where you keep people constant. The clothing requirements, in some strict sense, aren't changing, but the actual clothing we wear keeps changing. It doesn't seem to stabilize.
Okay. I think we can take this offline. Let's try to get maybe a couple more questions in.
So I have another question in the line of this extension to the model. Often people start with a need for something, and then the recommender system would pick up objects based on their friends, whereas here, instead, you pick a friend and then you choose an item. So I was wondering whether if you switch this order, you can still prove this equilibrium.
So what is the order you suggest?
That instead of, in your model, you first pick a person and then you go through the items that this person had. What about instead if you switch, you pick an item and then you go through all your friends and see who has bought the item?
Okay, so first of all, the model is, again, it is a probabilistic model, so it's as if. So it shouldn't be taken as a literal representation of the psychological process that takes place when a person is recommended an item and so on. So this would be the net effect of. So then, so it's not clear to me the mechanism that you're suggesting. Maybe you can talk offline so I
Yes,
can understand
okay.
questions.
Fine.
Okay, and maybe one last question, sorry. Yep, over there.
Hi. I think it's been shown in behavioral economics literature that people tend to lock onto previous decisions. You know, they kind of stabilize themselves. I'm wondering if you've tried modeling that sort of behavior where you might take a recommendation, but then once you've made a decision, you have a high probability of sticking with that decision in the future. That kind of positive feedback might actually lead to this sort of chaotic behavior that was asked about earlier.
Yeah, so it's an interesting question for future work. I haven't
Okay, you
thought
haven't
about it.
looked at that yet. Okay.
Okay, let's thank the speaker again. Thank you.